Hey, Brian, ready to kick things off?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Hello and welcome to Python Bytes, where we deliver Python news and headlines directly to your earbuds. This is episode 400. Woo! How about that?
Yay.
I'm Michael Kennedy.
And I'm Brian Ocken.
And this episode is brought to you by Scout APM. Check them out. Links in the podcast player, show notes, or on the website, and we'll tell you more about them later. Connect with us over on Mastodon. Links in the show notes. And hopefully you're watching us live now on Mondays. Usually you can find out by going to pythonbytes.fm/live. And usually we have the next one scheduled and you can get notified about that. And for those of you who would like, even if you missed the show, a quick digest, an artisanal, handcrafted digest of all the things we talked about for the week, just become a friend of the show, sign up for the newsletter, pythonbytes.fm, click on newsletter. Well, before we get into the topics, officially, Brian, I think we got to say a little bit something about 400.
Yeah, it's quite a big number.
So big that you wore an amazing hat with a butterfly.
Yeah.
That's a cool hat. Well, I want to start by saying, one, thanks to you. Two, thanks to the thousands and thousands of people who listen every week, make this possible, honestly, and I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks to you too. Whatever year it was when we started, you reached out to me and said, "Hey, well, do you feel like doing a podcast together?" And I really wouldn't have thought we would have been at 400 episodes. It's pretty cool.
I know, it's incredible. And I thought, well, we don't have really any guests or a lot of forum stuff. So let's celebrate this. I asked ChatGPT to say, I said, look, there's this big milestone. Could you just give us a quick celebration sort of thing? And I think there's a few things that are notable before I read this off. It's pretty short. So,
okay.
But I think it's notable that it knows about you, knows about me, knows about the show, knows about what the show is about and the topics we've covered. So anyway, here we go. This is ChatGPT Celebrates episode 400 of Python Bytes. Welcome to the big 400 Pythonistas. It's hard to believe we're celebrating the 400th episode of Python Bytes. From the early days of bite-sized Python news to becoming the source of all things Python, it's been a wild ride. We've laughed over the quirks, gasped at new libraries, and said farewell to the Gill together. Whether you're a seasoned developer, a curious learner, or just here for the witty banter, you've been an essential part of this journey. To Michael and Brian, you've built a community that turns import this into more than just Zen. It's a family of passionate Pythonistas. Your dedication, insight, and humor makes this show more than just tech news. It's a weekly celebration of what we love about Python and why we keep coming back for more. Here's to the next 400 episodes. May your code be bug-free, your test pass on the first run, and your Python version always be up to date. Rocket snake emoji. Oh, that's pretty good, isn't it? Actually.
Yeah, I'm touched. ChatGPT, I didn't know you loved me that much.
I know. Thank you, ChatGPT.
And Michael, that's just touching.
It is
pretty cool, actually. I like that. Turns import this into more than just Zen.
Indeed. Nice. I see some thank you out in the audience, and thank you, all you guys out there. With that, shall we talk about whatever you want to talk about first?
Sure.
As we've done 399 other times, apparently.
Yeah. Let's talk about Python, specifically Python 3.13. It's just right around the corner. The official release is scheduled for the 3.13.0 is supposed to come out on October 1st. That's just right around the corner. That's hard to believe. So 3.13.0 candidate release, or RC2, is out. So that was released September 6th, a few days ago. And I'm linking to I didn't link to the right thing. But there is, I'll just talk about it here. Anyway, it comes out October 1st. Lucas Langa, which we will link to his post, has a post to talk about it as well. Also talks about a few other releases. There's security releases for 3.12, 3.11, 3.10, 3.9, and 3.8. It's a lot of releases. And an interesting thing about the older releases, I'll cover those first, is that 3.12 has a has a Mac release. It has binary releases, and the Mac release is only for 10.13 or newer. If you've kept up to date like fairly recently, it should be fine, because I looked at mine and it was like way past that. But there is a limited. There are limits to the Mac OS binary version, and all the others like 3.11 through 3.8, they don't have binary distributions built, which is interesting. But anyway, so those what we're really excited about is 3.13. Of course, it's coming out right around the corner. There's a call to action here that is a strong encouragement for third-party Python projects and maintainers of third-party projects to prepare your projects, because people will be upgrading in October, because all the last upgrades have been so easy. People are going to upgrade. So make sure your projects are ready. Go ahead and start testing on them, and if there's any issues, submit to the bug tracker. And then also, please keep in mind that the RC2 is a preview release, so it's close to the final release, but it's not recommended for production environments. So yes, test with it. Don't run in production yet. So that's cool. The one thing that I thought was interesting, so I've kind of migrated. We talked about this recently, is upgrading your local Python with UV Python. You can't use that for 3.13, so you still have to use python.org or some other mechanism to install 3.13. You can't do that through UV Python yet. So
yeah, well, we can actually, one of my items touches on that, so we'll talk about that shortly.
Okay, so
yeah,
yay! I'm excited.
Yay! Henry Schreiner out in the audience says we're also going to have to change building wheels with 3.12 to be 10.13 plus and CI build wheels. Interesting. You think about the cascading effects of all these requirements, and 10.13 being the Mac OS version.
Yeah, was that when they split and did like the Intel versus whatever the other thing is, or
I think it may have been, but the current version does support the Intel ones. I'm pretty sure. It's just, well, as of today, they're supposed to announce a lot of that Apple Intelligence, their AI. Oh boy. So that, I believe, is going to be one of the hard splits as well. It's like that stuff I don't think is going to work on Intel, but we'll see what they say.
Okay.
I think that's literally going on right now as we speak, the Apple keynote thing, which is a weird 1-hour ad that people look forward to. Yeah. Okay. Such is the world we live in. All right. Let's carry on with a pretty sweet transition from UV to talking more UV here. So I wrote up, we've been talking about UV recently, and a couple of different, this is kind of a little mini extra all around one topic. So I wrote up an article about how I'm using the UV Python thing that you just mentioned, Brian, using that to basically dramatically improve how we build Docker images, one of which runs, or several of which, I guess, run Python Bytes. Python Bytes.m gives you the RSS feed, the files, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So people can check that out. But the short and the long of it is, if you get down to the bottom, one, it comes with an example, a little Flask app, multi-tier, well, multi-image, not multi-tier, Flask app that shows how to go from basic Ubuntu image to having whatever version of Python you want with a virtual environment set up on it, including setting up your dependencies and a web server and all of that in 7 seconds from nothing, like a no cache style a build. And that gives you a base image. You can just kind of keep chilling. And then if you take an app and you build it on top of that, like a Flask app or some other kind of Python app, I got it building around 700 to 800 milliseconds. So less than a second, which is awesome. Okay. So, we talked about this back on 396 and 398, and we've been kind of hitting a lot. But I just recently had Charlie Marsh from Astral on, and we talked about this. And I asked him things like, so I see you don't have it didn't have the latest 3.12 for a couple of days, and I noticed that you don't have a 3.13. And basically his thinking, if I remember it correctly, is more or less we plan on supporting a version before it becomes final, before it becomes stable and gets released. So by the time 3.13 gold master, right, whatever it comes after, the official 3.13.0 release, I guess, comes out, it should be available in UV, but I'm not sure how much before then. Anyway, that's kind of cool. I just checked, and not that one. I just checked, and 3.12.6 is already available. I don't know when it was available, but it is now, and that was released 3 days ago. So that's pretty quick.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, well, and we also heard from so Henry Schreiner says 3.13 just got merged in the same place, which is that Python build standalone, and the also the 3.13t is now in a PR. So it
interesting.
We should
the free threaded version.
Yeah. So hopefully.
Yeah, I think, and that was my final thing to point out is if people are like, well, okay, when I say UV Python, or what I don't say UV Python necessarily. What I do is I create a virtual environment with UV, and I tell it I want it this version of Python.
Oh, okay.
Right. And it goes, oh, you want that version of Python? Either we've already cached it, or if we don't, we'll just download it from Python build standalone and then put it there for you. So if your common working artifact is a virtual environment, then you don't have to necessarily have, it doesn't even matter if you have system Python. Like literally you could not have Python on your machine and this would still get you a virtual environment with the right version of Python that you ask. But the source of all of this, also I learned about this from talking to Charlie last week, is Python build standalone. And if you look at the releases, like let's see, for example, on the latest release, there 773 different builds or something.
Wow.
Look at that. So you can see here there's CPython 3.10.14 with something on x86 64 for PCs on Windows with this thing. There's just so many variations. So basically when you say UV, create me a virtual environment with this Python, it's going to go hunt through those 773, find the one that's the right fit and just download it and put it there if it's not already cached. So anyway, that's the whole story.
Okay. So that thing has that one thing has a 3.13. It just hasn't been released yet then. So I guess we're waiting on that release.
Yeah. So thank you, Henry. That gives us some more information. I imagine that it's really down to just what Python build standalone is doing, and then UV just give me the list of options and let me find things that match this operating system. Something like that.
It sounds like both of us went down the same rabbit hole, but it is kind of neat to find out where the source of this is, so that I know that it wasn't that hidden, but it did take a little bit of looking to figure out.
Well, they could have been building it themselves. You don't ever know. Like, you don't know what setting. There's all sorts of stuff that's interesting. And there's also, if I recall correctly, Charlie said there are different build optimization settings for Python build standalone than say what you get off of python.org or out of Homebrew. It's interesting. For example, like profile guided optimizations and things like that. And I don't remember which had which is better, but I feel like the build standalone came out pretty strong there. Yeah. Cool. All right. Now, before we move on, Brian, let's hear about Scout. Let me tell you real quick about Scout APM. They're big supporters of Python Bytes, so we appreciate that very much. So if you are tired of spending hours trying to find the root cause of issues impacting your performance, then you owe it to yourself to check out Scout APM. They're a leading Python application performance monitoring tool, APM, that helps you identify and solve performance abnormalities faster and easier. Scout APM ties bottlenecks such as memory leaks, slow database queries, background jobs, and the dreaded N+1 queries that you can end up if you do lazy loading in your ORM. And then you say, oh no, why is it so slow? Why are you doing 200 database queries for what should be one? So you can find out things like that. And it links it back directly to source code, so you can spend less time in the debugger and tailing logs and just finding the problems and moving on. And you'll love it because it's built for developers by developers. It makes it easy to get set up. Seriously, you can do it in less than 4 minutes. So that's awesome. And the best part is the pricing is straightforward. You only pay for the data that you use with no hidden overage fees or per seat pricing. And I just learned this, Brian. They provide the pro version for free to all open source projects. So if you're an open source maintainer and you want to have Scout APM for that project, just shoot them a message or something on their pricing page about that. So you can start your free trial and get instant insights today. Visit pythonbytes.fm/scout. The link is in your podcast player show notes as well. And please use that link. Don't just search for them, because otherwise they don't think you came from us, and then they'd stop supporting the show. So please use our link, pythonbytes.fm/scout. Check them out. It really supports the show. All right, over to you.
Cool. I wanted to talk about read the docs for a little bit. So it just seems like, read the docs been around forever, right? Apparently not. Yeah. So so there's an article by Eric Holscher, 10 years of sustainable open source. And it's a little bit of some cool history here. So one, we totally rely on read the docs. And all the tools around it. So read the docs apparently started with a 48-hour open source sprint in 2010. 48 hours, wow. So 2 days, I guess. And it grew to become a successful part of the Python ecosystem and other open source projects. And yeah, obviously it's just been around 2010. But I guess that's about the time that I really started jumping in and being part of the Python community, and not just just a user of Python, but part of the community. So, so that's why it seems like it's been there forever for me. And in 2014, they created readthedocs.org is the open source thing. Readthedocs.com is in 2014, and there's links to the announcements from 2010 for announcing read the docs, and the announcement for read the docs for business, the .com. So this is kind of an interesting story about how to make a service that helps open source communities all over the place, and how to make that sustainable. So they're still sustainable, which is cool. So what is the sustainability model? How do they do that? Because there's 4 full-time people working on this, which is not that big. I mean, 4 people. There's probably a lot of volunteers on the open source side also, but 4 full-time people, that's pretty cool. Anyway, there's the .org side has single non-tracking ads, and I think they were one of the first that I was aware of that did like a single, just like ethical ads or something, that just had ads, but it wasn't tracking you at all, which is how ads should be, I think. And I'm totally okay with that, to help them sustain their model. And then the .com is a paid service. It helps companies for private repos and additional. They have other benefits also, but sort of read the docs for companies. And then it also talks about things that didn't work, which I love this. I love discussing the parts that didn't work. Have you tried this? One of the things was just trying donations and other optional support. And it just didn't work at all. And it left people with mental health issues and burnout. That's terrible. The other thing was consulting services, where you think about that, like maybe offer services for people to pay. But the bad downside of that was it took away from time that they wanted to work on the main project. They experimented with grant funding, and that was cool because they got like a blob of money at a time, but it's a one-time thing, and it's not that easy to keep going and getting more grants. So the current model is the paid service plus the advertising, and that's cool. They talk about some lessons learned, which is neat. Basically, you don't get extra points for being bootstrapped. People will compare you to VC-funded companies anyway, which it's cool that they call it out, because that's obvious, but also sometimes not obvious. Even if you're community driven and bootstrapped, you don't get any points for that. We still expect you to be perfect. The other thing was the keeping trust in the community was the most important thing. Yeah, they said that it's cliche, but trust is hard to earn and easy to lose. Definitely. And they can't maximize profits um, unless you keep trust in with the community, which definitely support that. The one part that I thought was one of the reasons why I highlighted this is because this is a lesson I think that can go not just for people trying to sustain a funding model, but just lots of open source projects can listen to this. And the lesson is contribution is easier in less complex parts of the code base. So they've noticed that they've got their core stuff, the readthedocs.org repo, the core stuff that is got some complex stuff in it, and it's hard to get people to help out. But there's other things like contributions to the Sphinx theme, or extensions, or small Python or JavaScript projects that are work alongside of it that are easier to get people to contribute to because they're smaller, less less complicated bits of code. I think a lot of open source projects probably could do something like that of separating out where the code is and say, if you'd like to contribute, maybe don't touch this part because it's kind of hairy and it takes a while to get into. You can, but it's going to be difficult. And I've noticed that with lots of projects. So anyway, congratulations to all of them for 10 years. That's awesome. And then I was reading something and I found I learned something is that I kind of associate read the docs with Sphinx only, but that's not true. There was an effort to separate some of the customization, and they have a different build process going on now. And you can the Sphinx or the read the docs build system now supports any documentation tool, or it should, which I didn't know about. So that's
that's cool.
great.
Almost like a general static site platform, probably.
Yeah. Anyway,
congratulations. It's a pretty important section of the Python community, and also got some cool Python some Portland ties as well, which is cool.
Yeah.
Really helps humanize the Python space, wouldn't you say, Brian?
Yeah.
Which is what I want to talk about next. This project by Hugo, I know you pointed this out before, Brian, I believe. If I can actually get to him. There we go. Hugo van Kennemande, CPython core developer and mini project maintainer. One of the projects is Humanize, and I recently, when I've written this code in small scale before, because I kind of needed it, and if I knew about this, I just wouldn't. But also, I recently just started using it, and it's super simple, super easy to adopt. You see examples of it right here on the GitHub screen if you visit their GitHub repo. Right? See where it says 7 months ago, last week, last year, that kind of stuff, instead of just putting a date.
Yeah.
It's that kind of stuff that Humanize does, but for different things. So if I go over to, I love all these ties from following on from you, from Read the Docs. If I go over to Read the Docs for them, and I wait, apparently, and it comes up. Okay, so then they basically have 4 areas that are relevant. It works in different languages, many different languages, which is cool. It mostly works on numbers, but as I pointed out, it also works on time. So if we look at time, it has natural date. Some of these don't have great examples. For example, the time and file size could have really nice dates. So the one I mentioned with the GitHub is natural delta. It would say things like a year ago, or 2 years ago, or in 13 seconds, stuff like that. It has similar natural time and precise deltas if you want, those kind of things. Also has for file size. So it'll say things like 300 bytes, 3.0 megabytes, 2.9 kilobytes, or whatever, right? So you can just give it a number and tell it here's how many bytes it is. Make this friendly, and it'll kind of figure out the right scale. Is it a megabyte, kilobyte? That is, because you don't want 0.000 megabytes. You just want, switch that to kilobytes or bytes, right? So file size is cool, but the one that has tons of stuff going on is number. So you can have an Associated Press style number. I guess this must be the way the convention when you're writing articles on how to speak about numbers. So if it's a small number, use written out words like FIVE for 5. But if it's 1001217, you don't write that out as a huge long thing. You just put the straight number, right? So I think the cutoff is 10, which is pretty cool. It has clamp, and so you can talk about percentiles. For example, if you say a really, really small number and you say the floor is 0.01%, or just that number as a ratio, it'll say the number that you have for this, the value is less than 0.01.
Oh, nice.
Right? Or you can do it as a percent here, and you can say this particular value is greater than 99%, or it's in the top 10%. Or you can just say like under 1 million, which is pretty awesome, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what else have we got here? Fractional. So this just takes floating point numbers and puts them into fractions like 1 3/10 or 1 1/3 or something like that. Int comma. This one I would just do with formatting, but you can have it put commas in for separators. Int word. This one is really nice. So if I have one with 7 zeros, it'll say 1.0 million. Or if you put in 1.2 billion, but as like integers, it'll just say 1.2 billion, or all kinds of things. You can give it precisions, etc. Nice, right?
It's very cool. I like the scientific stuff.
The scientific is good. The metric, this is really nice. If you give it a base measurement like watts or grams or something, and then you say, give me this number in that unit system. So for example, if you say 1500 in terms of volts, it'll give you 1.5 kilovolts. That's
cool.
Pretty fancy. Yeah. Or watts, and you give it some huge number, it'll say this many megawatts. Or
Yeah.
a really, really small one, micro. I don't know what F is in metric, because to me that's Fahrenheit. So whatever.
And the micro stuff is cool because I always have to hunt it down. I have no idea how to type a micro symbol.
Yeah. So
click to the scientific one. The 10 to the powers are pretty cool. The 10 to the -1, with the little superscript. That's neat.
Yeah. Instead of having 10e3, it actually has 10 superscript 3. So 1,000 is 1 times 10 to the 3, with the 3, like you would write it, not the way computers have to write it. So yeah, it's really nice. Anyway, It's just, if you need this kind of stuff, really easy to adopt and understand. If not, then still interesting. However, if someone is out there looking to contribute to this project, I would say
more examples.
The numbers have awesome examples, and all the other ones are kind of, you may or may not even know what it's going to do. So hey, put together some examples as a PR and ship them over to you guys. That'd be cool.
And documentation contributions are usually very welcome. So
yes, indeed. All right, cool. Extras, Brian.
I just have one extra I wanted to shout out. So I talked about that Python test podcast is going to go back to test and code, even though so it is. So I finally finished that migration and actually put out an episode. So 222 is the 222 is the second episode of a 2-part series that started in June. Sorry.
Serious cliffhanger.
So so that's there. And then I got a question. I sent out an email and said, hey, finally have another episode out. And somebody said, you should do transcripts. And I guess I hadn't announced that, but transcripts are there. I've had transcripts in the last, I don't know, like the last 30 episodes or something. So transcripts are AI generated, so they're not perfect. Like, this is great. I gotta find one of these. db.py, that's fine, but there's like some .pies that show up as .pi and some .pie, It's some .db, like actually spelling out the DOT. This is terrible. Oh, API.pie. This is hilarious. So I could go through and try to fix this stuff, but I'm going to probably try to hire my kid to go do it for me. But anyway, so they're there. That's all I wanted to say is it's in it. I'm not doing this weekly. I actually talked to a friend of mine, Michael Kennedy, and he said it'd be kind of cool to do seasons, and so I'm kicking around the idea of doing seasons.
Yeah, well, themes, I like it. I think it would be great.
Themes, yeah. So anyway, that's just my extra.
Awesome. I have a couple quick. The Code in the Castle event is almost over. It's almost booked and happening. So if you want to be part of it, I'll put a link in there, please. Last call. So
It's
check
right
that
around
out.
the corner.
Yeah, I know. All right, we got some interesting email. What's it? I think I covered the Anaconda Code plugin for Excel, how it runs locally, it runs on PyScript, all these good things, gives you other features. Well, let me look who sent this in. I want to make sure I give some credit. This was by Ruud Vanderham. Thank you for sending this in. This is a project he created. And basically, and when you have these Excel Python bits of code, you have to write all the code in one function and things like that. And there's other limitations as well. So basically, he made it so you can have a lot more formatting variability, I suppose. And then you just have this bit of code that will just run a whole set of different bits of code that you can have into your workbook, which is kind of interesting. So as a follow-up to that, people are interested, they can check that out. And just a quick shout out to iStats Menu. Do you iStats Menu, Brian, for your Mac?
No.
If you want sort of real-time stats for what your Mac is up to, as they just released a new version, looks super cool. I'm just starting to play with it. So obvious things like CPU and stuff, but if you hover over them, it'll give you tons of detail. Like Mac OS is kind of hard to get a lot of these pieces of information, but it'll have uptime. It'll have like how much power your CPU is pulling out of, or your computer's pulling out of the wall, which is kind of interesting as a, how hard is it working? Like how many watts is it pulling? And so on. Anyway, it's
just cool. That's cool.
Yeah. People can check it out. It's pretty nice.
Nice.
Yeah. That is it. And you want to close it out with a joke, our big episode 400?
Definitely.
All right. So this is sort of in the theme of I'm learning new programming languages, right? Mostly as beginners. Comes from Dev Humor, says, beginner programmers, when they learn a new programming language, just a shock. Is this Morty? I don't know. I think so. Anyway, well, that just sounds like Python with extra steps.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That's cool. But why all the stuff there? Anyway, thanks for episode 400. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Scott APM, for supporting the show. Check them out as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. See you, Brian.